romantic relationships where you put all of your kind of eggs in the one person basket is really only since the romantic period about 300 years ago. Previous to that, monogamous relationships for a very long time were about money and property. They really had very little to do with love. And on paper, anybody would agree. We all kind of agreed for 300 years. Well, if you have enough love, like that's a way better foundation for a healthy monogamous relationship. Yeah, that just makes sense, right? Only problem is we've never pulled it off. So maybe some part of the model is flawed.
Johnny, are you saying that love did not exist before 300 years ago?
It didn't. Everyone was obviously brutal and hateful towards each other. Whenever we thought we got diseased, we blamed our immediate significant other and then just either had them killed or beaten. So, you know. No, love of course existed. A lot of other cultures, and the word they use for the passionate love that we express in our serious relationships now, referred to in most other cultures the kind of love you would have in an affair. They used to get married for the social benefits, but look for love in affairs and extramarital things.
Are you saying that all relationships back then were just like how Timothy Chalamet actually loves Zendaya, but he actually marries Florence Pugh?
Not all of them, but certainly for anybody that had property, I think it was a lot closer to that.
What do you think is the pitfall of most relationships?
So this is interesting because I think there's been a lot happening with relationships, especially over the last 20 or so years since the dawn of the internet. I think the biggest challenge facing relationships right now is people are more and more isolated in weird ways. So what happens because we don't have the same social outlets we used to, like if you look at like every kind of social function, bar attendance is way down compared to what it used to be, right? We don't go bowling anymore. We don't do things out in the social world with like people. And so we try to get those social needs met more and more by one person. And so we put a higher level of demand on one partner. And unsurprisingly, those partners are rarely often able to meet those demands. And it creates a lot of tension and challenge in the relationship and creates some instability. So the numbers aren't good. The numbers on this basically show that people have the worst rate of success of successful relationships, successful long-term relationships ever right now. Something like 90% of long-term relationships of people in their 20s fail. So if you start a relationship before you're 30, 10% chance of success. It's not good. You know, some things modify that. Having kids tends to make it a little stickier. Certain conditions can help, but I mean, you're fighting against the odds. So knowing that it's such an uphill battle to climb, there's a lot of different people offering ideas. There's a lot of different people offering advice. Here's a funny thing that I think a lot of people haven't thought about. And so I want to ask you this question. I've asked a lot of people this question before.
Okay.
So we live in a world where relationship advice is big business.
Yeah.
Right? Like
yeah.
if you
YouTube algorithm loves it.
Yeah. Forget just the YouTube algorithm. There's entire rows of shelves full of books about this at Barnes & Noble. There's TV shows, you know, there are radio shows you can call into and be like, hey, me and my girlfriend have this problem. Like we have just done that. And then there's the fact that since the 1970s, talk therapy has become the norm for how we solve problems. Right? Mm-hmm. And we are now spending about 10 times the amount of money, time, and energy on talk therapy that we ever have, like if you compare like since 1970. So what are the results of that?
Dude, obviously better relationships across the board.
Doesn't seem like it. And so let me just start generally. What would you attribute all of that to?
Oh God. Dude, I think the internet has completely decimated relationship qualities. Being in one, trying to get into one, it sucks either way around. And not just the internet. Let's say the internet didn't existed, but all the devices that we have. Okay, I'll take that back. Internet would have to exist for that. but just the ability to feel like you have a ton of options, and then also see a bunch of other people who all of our algorithms on social media attribute to be the most pretty and attractive people ever, and we see them all the time, in front of our faces on our phones, which are in front of our faces all the time, more often than real people. So we're only looking at the top 1% of people, if even, all the time. And then we go interact with real people and they just cannot compare. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It messes with our human ability to relate to each other and what we want, what we desire.
So you gave the answer that I feel like a lot of people generically give. I don't blame you for giving it, right?
Damn it. I knew you were going to say that, Johnny. I'm wrong.
Well, and look, here's the funny thing. All that money, energy, and talk therapy, guess what all the therapists and the psychologists are saying?
Same thing?
Yeah. They're like, oh, it's the internet. Okay, well, so then they give advice on how to make the internet not be your problem. And guess what? The advice still doesn't work. So I don't think all this advice is coming from a place of bad faith and all these therapists, like, on purpose trying to ruin your life. I think they mean well most of the time, most of them, right? So why doesn't if we know the problem, why are we failing to fix it? And so either two things. It's either not the problem or the advice is bad.
Could I posit a third thing?
Sure.
Maybe the problem's like insurmountable.
Well, and if that's the case, then what are we doing? Because we have the entire world.
We just haven't figured it out yet.
And so let me posit my theory.
Okay. Yeah, that's pessimism. My bad.
For a long time, I think the problem is we created a model of relationships. And we said, this is the model. And everybody kind of just passively agreed to that model. And we're enrolled in a social experiment that's really not that old. I mean, the idea of single monogamous romantic relationships where you put all of your kind of eggs in the one person basket, this serial monogamy that most people practice, is really only since the Romantic period, about 300 years ago. Previous to that, monogamous relationships for a very long time were about money and property. They really had very little to do with love. And like on paper, anybody would agree. Like, and we did agree, we all kind of agreed for 300 years. Well, if you have enough love, then it should solve all those. Like, that's a way better foundation for a healthy, monogamous relationship. Yeah, should that just makes sense, right? Only problem is we've never pulled it off. So maybe some part of the model is flawed.
Johnny, are you saying that love did not exist before 300 years ago?
No, it didn't. Everyone was obviously brutal and hateful towards each other. This was actually a product of whenever we thought we got diseased, we blamed our immediate significant other and then just either had them killed or beaten. So,
Oh, man.
No, love of course existed. Here's a funny thing. A lot of people don't know this. A lot of other cultures and the word they use for the passionate love that we express in our serious relationships now, in the past usually referred to in most other cultures the kind of love you would have in an affair. And that's actually what we see. We see people like they used to get married for the social benefits, but look for love in affairs and extramarital things.
Okay, so then is it really any different today than it was back then? If people were still basically having, if we could replace the affairs of then with regular relationships of now, like, is it any different than what we're doing today?
No, because neither were successful.
Oh, so even the affairs back then sucked too, as much as our regular relationships do.
Yeah, it causes all kinds of problems. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. Here I am trying to create this stable relationship so we can pass down our cows to our kids. And now I find out you've been sleeping around on the side, so I don't even know if that's my kid. And because there's no paternity tests, yeah, it was a mess.
Are you saying that all relationships back then were just like how Timothy Chalamet actually loves Zendaya, but he actually marries Florence Pugh, and he continues his whole life as God Emperor of Dune just marrying the queen, but then also loving his consort?
Not all of them.
Okay.
But certainly for anybody that had property, I think it was a lot closer to that.
Interesting.
The peasants tended to settle down because life was harder, and so you needed a really strong, robust, long-term partner to make it.
Were people just so emotionally mature back then that when they got someone in front of them, they said, "Hey, I'm marrying you, and you're like the one of three women of choice in my village. That I'm going to make it work with you no matter what."
I don't know if emotional maturity was the case, but when you considered your options were in fact limited.
Okay.
So, what else were you gonna do? You know, and I think that's what changed in the Romantic period. We all left the farm, started working in these cities,
Uh huh.
started having access to a wider social network than we ever had before. And we were bored because we had this thing now called a little bit of free time on our hands. And so we started writing love poems and novels. And alas, the Romantic period was born. And it changed culture forever.